All right, so I'm gonna give a brief history of the 4 days, or May Day, and also the 3 days afterwards that have to do with why we're here and why this became an international holiday for workers around the world. So one thing to keep in mind is that all over the world, people are celebrating the same holiday. There's a lot of things going on in New York and San Francisco, Barcelona, Athens, so on and so forth. So that's a good thing to keep in mind. So we'll start off by, so the second international, which was held in Paris in 1889, would set May 1st aside for the day that the workers of the world would ask for an 8-hour day. So at this time, people had between 10 and 12-hour work days, and they felt that their days should be shorter. So, and this was influenced by the labor movement here in America, and especially in Chicago in 1886. So they were asking, so on October 7th, 1884, May 1st was the day set aside for US and Canada to make the 8-hour day the standard work day here in America. And so they started different committees and associations to have a general strike on that day, and to basically shut down the cities and demand from their employers that they have an 8-hour work day. So their motto was 8 hours for work, 8 hours for sleep, and 8 hours for what we want. And May Day was most aggressive in Chicago because of the labor movement that was already going on there. There was lots of unionization and different socialist and left-wing parties. And they had the 8-hour association had the full backing of the different revolutionary labor groups and even some of the more conservative labor groups at the time. So yeah. So an 8-hour association was set up in preparation for May 1st of 1886, 2 years before this even happened. So they had a really long time to plan it, and a lot of work went into this event. But within that, there was some people who were more radical and wanted the 8-hour workday for 10 hours pay, and some of the more conservative unions thought that was asking too much, that they wouldn't do it, and that they wanted the 8-hour day for only 8 hours pay. So there was just kind of this weird dichotomy going on within the movement, but it wasn't that big of a deal because they ended up winning for the 8-hour day with 10 hours pay. So May 1st came about. There was 50,000 workers in Chicago that won the 8-hour day for 10 hours pay, but there was also a lot of workers who didn't get it. So the strikes and the demonstrations continued on through the next 3 days. And there was a lot of oppression from the police force and the employers working together to stop the labor movement at that time, because it was so strong at this point, in Chicago especially. So like I said, the strikes and the demonstrations continued, and then on May 3rd, there was a strike going on, and they were trying to break the what they call scabs, the people that the employers would hire in order to take over the jobs for the people who were going on strike. They were trying to stop them from working, especially at this one plant, the McCormick Reaper Works, which was one of the biggest employers in Chicago at the time. And they also, they had a lot of German immigrants that were working there. And so they had come from Germany to America for the American dream, and they weren't seeing it happen. So they were the Germans were especially angry, it seemed. And so May 3rd, there was, the police showed up. They were trying to break the strike from happening, and what was it? I think 6 workers got killed and many more were injured. At that time, they didn't really have riot police or anything. They just pulled out their guns and started shooting most of the time. So there was a lot of bad things that happened with that. So, and one of the leaders of one of the German leaders of the labor movement at that time was August Spies, and he was there to witness what happened at the McCormick Reaper Works, and he was really, really upset about it. And so he wrote a letter, or like a call out the next day, and for people to meet at Haymarket Square on May 4th so that people would give speeches about what happened and what was going on with state oppression, and to talk about the 8-hour workday. And so when they met at the Haymarket Square, there wasn't as many people as they expected to be there, and because a lot of people had been talking about committing violent acts and things like that because they were so angry about what had happened the day before. And so when they got there, most of the leaders of the labor movement, like August Spies and Albert Parsons, gave speeches at Haymarket Square. and there was the police officers were waiting, and the mayor had actually attended the rally to see what they were talking about, because everyone in the city was saying, oh, they're talking about violent things, blah, blah, blah. And the mayor showed up and he said that was all a joke. They weren't talking about anything violent. They were talking about what they wanted, which was the 8-hour workday. And so he went back to the police force and told them, you can leave, you don't have to be here, everything's fine. They're not talking about anything that they shouldn't be. And so then some of the police force left, most of it didn't. And then they eventually came to break up the rally. And at that point there was a big standoff between the workers and the police officers. And at that point no one knows who it was, whether it was an infiltrator or someone, but someone threw a bomb, and lots of police officers got killed and workers got killed, and then there was this big, lots of gunfire and things like that happened. And so over the course of the next like 20 days, different people were arrested, mainly people who were leading the labor movement in Chicago at that time, like George Ingalls and Albert Parsons and August Spies and Louis Ling and Oscar Neebe and a lot of other people. And so over the next like 3 years, over the next year, there was a lot. They went to trial. There was this big deal about it, and they didn't have any proof that these people had actually done the bomb throwing. So they were really just on trial for speaking about the labor movement and saying militant things, basically. And so eventually, 4 of them were sentenced to death. One of them was either assassinated or killed himself in prison, and 5 were sentenced to death. One might have killed himself or was assassinated in prison, and 4 were hung at the gallows. And 2 others were sentenced to life, and Oscar Neebe was sentenced to 15 years in prison. And so this is all related to the last event that we'll have at 8 o'clock tonight, and we're gonna reenact the 4 martyrs that were hung for the Chicago labor movement, and we're gonna reenact their last speeches, like short excerpts of them, because some of their speeches, like Albert Parsons, was like a day and a half long. So we're gonna make them short and stuff like that. And Tristan's gonna talk about some stuff related to this as well. Just kind of like clear up some of the things he said.
Yeah, this is a story we don't remember very much, right? Who learned this story in school? I definitely didn't. Yeah? I think that's something really important to remember, right? Is that this is history that all of us have, that we don't know, and there's a reason why we don't know it, right? And the relationship of that history to the day is really strong, right? May Day historically was the time where people shared this story. And then a series of things happened to take May Day away, to take the history away by taking May Day away, if that makes sense. So, for example, in 1947, they were really scared in the United States government. This was right as the McCarthy era was starting to begin. They were really scared about the increasing influence that communists and leftists had after World War II ended, right? So there had been a Great Depression, there was World War II, everybody was, not everybody, but a lot of people were really involved in the war effort, and then the war ended, right? 1946 was the last big general strike in United States history until today, right? It was in Oakland. They shut down the entire city. And there was a wave of strikes that year in 1946. There was a lot happening. And people got really scared in the government and the people that owned the businesses. So in 1947, they changed Workers' Day to what's now Labor Day in September. They renamed May 1st Loyalty Day. Then they renamed it Law Day, right? It was a day where people made oaths of allegiance to the United States government rather than to labor or to workers, or that's what they had done previously on May Day, right? So I think this is a really important thing to remember. This isn't just like a story that is suddenly becoming significant. This is a story that created the society we're now in, and that then was taken from us, and we get to take back if we want it. So we're gonna do a little bit more interactive element to this, right? I have a couple of things to add, but first, if this is possible, let's try it out anyway. Let's go really quick around the circle, and if people can just add, there's a lot of other things that May Day might mean to people. And if you can say in like 2 or 3 or max like 10 words, if you can just say what it means when you hear it in your head, just say that. And we're gonna go around the circle really quick, right? When I think about it, I think about immigration.
Exploitation.
A new start. What does MayDay mean to you?
You can skip people that have stuff in their mouths if they need to.
Celebration.
Love of liberty.
MayDay Los Angeles 2007. Check it out.
Internationalism.
Coming together, new beginning.
MayDay in Pakistan. Every year we had a torchlight procession with the 4, they were called the Martyrs of Chicago. I would draw the posters, and it reminds me of it's International MayDay, and we have a global economy, so we have to be part of International MayDay.
Labor union and my husband's
Planting of seeds and the rebirth.
Yeah.
Of spring, nature.
Solidarity.
Cool.
Everyone's coming together.
Dances around the maypole.
Maple.
Humanity.
Revolution.
Revolution.
Same thing. A good day to start to kick off the revolution again.
Yeah, the MayDay pole thing it goes back before any of this. It's pre-Christian. It's reverence for the earth and people, each other, and love.
King Kamehameha Day in Honolulu, all the hula festivals.
Lori has one?
Lori says it was her late best friend's birthday.
I think of the emergency, the MayDay, and so I think of mutual aid.
I think of all the present and past wobblies.
Lovely.
A new beginning.
Emergencies.
I think about the connection between why the labor movement had MayDay and the pagan holiday of Beltane, and fertility and love and all of that. Once you take away repression and control, what you have is community, and that's what MayDay means to me.
Remembrance and inspiration.
Price of social justice.
Workers' solidarity and the martyrs of Chicago.
Chicago. There we go. Bringing it back around. So one thing that I really wanted to add, there's a few things here, right? That there's this question: how did they actually do it when they were asking for an 8-hour day, right? So there had been lots and lots of strikes up to that point. In 1877, they called it the Great Uprisings. There were hundreds of thousands of workers on solidarity strike with each other, right? So this had been going on for a long time, ever since the Civil War. What made 1886 and a really sort of special tactical change was what they decided was, we're gonna work for 8 hours on that day, right? They didn't all go on strike that day. They said, we're gonna work 8 hours and then we're leaving. And we're expecting full pay, right? Instead of working the 10 or 12 or 16 hours that they had been working the day before, right? If you work 16 hours on April 30th, and you say, I'm gonna work half that tomorrow, and I expect the same pay, right? So they said, we're gonna do that, and we're all gonna do that. And some employers, before it ever happened, said, cool, we're down. We'll give you the same pay, 8-hour day, and some of them had even done it in the year or two up to that point. There were businesses all over Chicago that had said, okay, we're going to give the 8-hour day. There were a lot that hadn't. And so they said, we're gonna all get together and do the same thing that day. And then the next day, any employer that fires his workers as they leave after that 8 hours, any employer that says, you don't get to come back tomorrow, you don't have a job because you're walking out halfway through the workday, any employer that does that, we're shutting them down tomorrow. Right? So you think tactically, how did they do it, and why was solidarity important? That was why it was important. Because you never knew which boss was gonna fire everybody as they walked out the door, and they were gonna need everybody's help the next day to make sure they could get their jobs back. So that's something that's a little different from what we see happening today. But it's something that we could imagine for what might happen next year. or it's something we might imagine for what was happening last year in Paris when some similar things were going on. They were trying to extend the work week, they were trying to extend retirement later on. They were saying anybody that fires their workers, of the 3 million of us in France that went on strike in order to stop that from happening, we're all going to be together and shut down those employers if they retaliate against their employees. So it didn't really happen in France. You didn't see that kind of retaliation, in part because everybody knew everyone else will come out and shut your business down if you do that to your workers, right? So you think tactically that's how this was intended to go. We didn't get the 8-hour day until about 30 years later, let's point out. This took a long time. Another thing I want to add in there, this organizing in Chicago, that was happening in about 23 languages. So Chicago was like an 80 or 90% of the city was immigrants, people that had not been born in the country, right? Chicago was a city of people from all over the world that had been kicked off of their land as peasants, that had worked in factories in Manchester, England, and then gotten fired and came to the US. It was people that were coming up from Mexico. It was people from all over the world that came to Chicago because it was a city of industry that had the lowest wages, that had the biggest labor struggles as a result, right? So you think about the challenges that we have, even trying to translate into 2 languages or 3. Imagine what they were doing. They started the People's Mic. For those that are familiar, is everybody familiar with what the People's Mic is? It's when in Occupy, one person speaks, then everybody repeats what they're saying. They were doing that in Chicago in 1886, not just because they couldn't hear each other, but because they didn't all speak the same language. So one person would speak, and then 20 people around them would shout what they had just said into Bohemian, or into Italian, or into Portuguese, or into Spanish, right? Or into Gaelic. All of those, that's why they needed the People's Mic in 1886, was so that everybody could understand what was being said at those rallies. And then of course, you have one person shout out and then they have to pass it along the waves, because we're talking about tens of thousands of workers congregating in these squares all over the Midwest. So 23 languages, if you can imagine it. Hundreds of thousands of workers going on strike together the same day, but speaking every different tongue. One of the reasons why I say immigration is what I think of is because that started to come back in the United States because of an immigration movement here. In 2006, who was at an immigration march or a labor rally on May 1st 6 years ago in 2006? Raise your hand.